Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just to keep the sunnah alive, we do it every year. We have it every day. So since it's me, I'll just keep it short. We don't have a guest scholar today. Normally I like to give at least 45 minutes to an hour for Shamaail, but it's already 4:40 and it's been a long day. So I think we'll try to keep it within 20 minutes, inshallah. 25. 30, no. We'll try to keep it in 25 minutes. I used to do all the Shama'il sessions, and then I felt like it was, enjoyable if we get other teachers involved. And so hopefully you guys are enjoying all the other instructors as well. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem, ma ba'd. We started off the first session that I taught by mentioning the quote of Imam Ghazali, where he says that we fall in love in this world based on three things. The first of which we covered on that day, which was what? External beauty. We love because of physical beauty. And we explained how there was no one that came close to the physical beauty of the Prophet ﷺ. And the second reason why we love individuals is because of inner characteristics or internal qualities. And those things can't be seen, but the more time you spend with someone, the more you understand who they truly are. And I always tell my full-time students in our boarding school, and I remind myself, that if you can sit with someone and within the first 5 minutes, they like who you are and they connect with you, that's a great quality. But if you can spend 5 years with someone and they still don't like you, that means there is some type of hypocrisy within us. That the person that spends 5 minutes with us likes us, but the person that knows us for 5 years doesn't like us. It's perhaps because the person that spent 5-10 minutes with us didn't get a full view of who we truly are. And the individual that spent a lot of time with us realized that character was just, that character that we were displaying was just a coverall of something else that was inside. It was just covering it. The Sahaba spent every second of their life with the Prophet ﷺ. You couldn't hide anything. Everything was exposed. So we love because of internal qualities. One day the Prophet ﷺ walked outside of the masjid, and this hadith I believe Shaykh Abdullah also mentioned. And as he walked out, the Sahabas were saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَعْطَى آدَمَ صَفِيَّهُ وَجَعَلَ مُوسَى كَلِمَتَهُ وَأَعْطَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ خُلَّتَهُ وَجَعَلَ عِيسَى رُوحَهُ. Allah has made Adam alayhi salam the first Abul Bashar, the father of all human beings. Then he made Ibrahim alayhi salam Khalilullah. Then he made Musa alayhi salam Kalimullah, spoke directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he chose to make Isa alayhi salam Ruhullah. I mean, these are special qualities and special positions. We always hear that our Prophet is the greatest person. So what does he have? What does he have that they had? And the Prophet walks out and he says to them, إِنِّي سَمِعْتُ قَوْلَكُمْ وَعَجَبَكُمْ. He says, not only have I heard your statements, I have also heard the tone in which you made those statements. He was so in tune with his companions that even the slightest change of tone, he knew what it was. Like that change, ajabakum, that you're kind of put off. Like, how is it so that our Prophet is the greatest when he doesn't have any of those things? And then he says to them, not in any demeaning way or degrading way, he simply says that أَنَا سَيَّدُ وُلِدَ آدَمَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَلَا فَخْرٍ. Yes, Allah gave Musa the power of being Kalimullah, and he made Ibrahim Khalilullah, and he made Isa Ruhullah. But let me tell you something. I will be the greatest human on the Day of Judgment. I have no pride in it. Like there's no second discussion or second statement after this. I will be the greatest person. There's a poem that describes the scene of the Day of Judgment when all of humankind will be standing there, or on their knees rather, hoping for the Day of Judgment to begin. I teach this in my Aqidah class where I try to explain the different stages of the Day of Judgment. The first stage of the Day of Judgment is what we call the field of Hashr, right? Where we all get together, but no hisab actually begins. We're just stuck at one place, right? مُهْتِعِينَ إِلَى الدَّاعِ. We run towards the caller, and we're just there. وَتَرَى النَّاسَ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَتَرَى كُلُّ أُمَّةٍ جَاثِيَةٍ. Everyone will be on their knees. No one will be able to move around. This is hisab, Yawm al-Hashr. right? So during Yawm al-Hashr, in some narrations in Surah Ma'arij, which it says it will be 50,000 years. One day will be 50,000 years. But for a believer, it will be like the time between Dhuhr and Asr. Nonetheless, Yawm al-Hashr is when we will just ask Allah to start hisab. Like we can't, the weight is too much. You know, when sometimes you get in trouble from your teacher or from a parent, and they say, wait till I get home. That waiting period is sometimes worse than the actual punishment. Just get it started. Just make it happen. So we'll say, yeah, you know, let's start hisab. But we won't have the ability to say to Allah, oh Allah, start hisab, because we're scared. So we'll go to Adam alayhi salam. Adam says, hey, not me. I ate an apple. Or I ate a fruit, not an apple. I ate a fruit. Then we'll go to Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says, no, not me. I had those 3, white lies that I needed to make, not me. Then we'll go to Musa alayhi salam. Say, no, I hit the guy and I actually killed him. Then we'll go to Isa alayhi salam. He'll say, nope, not me. These people try to make me their Lord. I don't want to go ask Allah right now. I'm afraid for myself. I'm not even asked about my mother. There's a hadith that's mentioned in Ibn Hibban that he will say that I won't even ask about my mother. Just worried about myself right now. Then we'll go to the Prophet ﷺ, and then he will choose. And this is where Maqam al-Mahmuda is described to be, where he will choose and he will be given the ability to go to the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will fall in sajda and he will start calling upon Allah. And he says in a hadith that I will praise Allah in a way that I don't even know what I will be saying. But it will be such a praise that will bring the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah will say to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Ya Muhammad, irfa' ra'sak, raise your head, right? This is not the time of prayer. This is not the time of prayer. That time has gone. Sal tu'ta. Ask and you will be given. Washfa' tushaffa'. Intercede and your intercession will immediately be accepted. This is not the time of prayer. So the poet says, إذا ما الناس يوم الدين قاموا إلى الرحمن واجتمع الجميع وجل الخطب وانقطع الرجاء وجل الخطب وانقطع الرجاء ونادى المذنبون من الشفيع هناك يقوم أحمد في يدي لواء الحمد منعقد الرفيع. He says that on that day, when everyone will be standing on one plain land and people will be in complete chaos, running around scared, and Mudhnibun, the sinners, will say, who is there to help us? At that moment, the Prophet will rise above everyone else. And that's when his honor will truly be shown. True virtue can only be recognized when it's compared to somebody else or something else. You only recognize good food if you tasted food that is not as tasty, right? You only recognize, a good, for example, I always use this example. I hope it doesn't offend anyone. But, if someone goes from America to Pakistan or Bangladesh or Arab country, and they play a little bit of basketball over here, right? A little bit. And they go back home and there's a basketball court and they go on the basketball court and they start balling and hooping. All those Pakistanis are like, man, this guy's Michael Jordan. This guy's Michael, man. Look at him. Shoes, his wristband. He has this Michael. But that same person, when he plays in America, he's not even picked up on a team because there's someone to compare him to. And the people that we're compared to, right, in America are far different than the ones that were compared to in Pakistan or Bangladesh when talking about basketball. So true virtue is recognized when it's being compared to others. And at that moment, the Prophet will say, look at me. This is who I am. Me being here is the reason why shafa'ah is happening. Me being here is the reason why we're moving forward past Hashr and upon the Sirat and hopefully into Jannah. So the virtue of the Prophet ﷺ was not questioned, but this was a conversation that even Sahabas had. And Imam Suyuti rahimahullah has a beautiful hadith in a book called Khasa'is al-Kubra, where he says, when the Prophet ﷺ was born, and inshallah didn't share this because it is a weaker narration, but it can be used for the sake of virtue. He says, when the Prophet ﷺ was born, Nada munadi, a caller called out, and the caller said, and people in the house heard this. The caller said, طوفوا به مشارق الأرض ومغاربها ليعرفوا به اسمه وصفته ونعته. This child that has been born, take him, not physically, but announce it to the world that who has come. Announce it. Let the world know that Muhammad ﷺ has been born and he is in the world. Let everyone know his name. Let everyone know his qualities. Let everyone know who is here. Similarly, in our life, on a more serious note, let everyone know what we have. لِيَعْرِفُوا بِهِ اسْمِهِ وَصِفَتِهِ وَنَعْتِهِ. When we walk into a place where we're not comfortable being, let being uncomfortable become a norm for us. It is not always okay to feel comfortable. Feeling uncomfortable in the state that you're in for the sake of deen is a very fulfilling feeling. It's a very fulfilling feeling. This is why the Prophet says that Bada al-Islamu ghariba, that this entire religion began from a strange thing. It was strange. Being strange doesn't necessarily have to have a negative connotation attached to it. Being strange, if forgiving means being strange, then be strange. If being generous means being strange, then be generous. If praying on the side of a road or on the side of a rest area means being strange, then let's be strange. If dressing modestly means being strange, then let's be strange. It's okay. Let everyone know who is born. And the Prophet is not alive with us. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبَهُم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that I will never punish this nation as long as we have two things within us. Two things. Number one, وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبَهُم وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبَهُم يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ. I will not punish a nation or a people as long as they seek istighfar. Number one. So we continuously seek istighfar. Number two, I will never punish a nation as long as you are within them. So as long as you're there, I will never punish them. The majority of the mufassirun look at this ayah and say that when the Prophet left, this condition was lost. But some mufassirun go on and say that وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ doesn't necessarily mean that as long as you are physically present within them, but rather it actually means by extension that as long as your sunnah is alive within them, we will not punish them. وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ. One of our teachers, when talking about this ayah, he wasn't able to speak much. He was elderly. He wouldn't talk much. When he got to this ayah, he said, وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ, and he simply pointed to his heart. وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ. That as long as he's in here, Allah will not punish us. Allah will not punish us. Nonetheless, the caller continues, and it says, talking about this hadith for me, we have the hadith of Ma'bad that Shaykh Abdullah spoke about in regards to the physical description. It's a complete summary of the physical beauty of the Prophet ﷺ. This narration for me is a complete summary, and this is what I'll just talk about this narration and we'll call it a day. It's a complete summary about the internal qualities of the Prophet ﷺ. The caller calls out and it says, أُعْتُوهُ خُلَقَ آدَمَ وَمَعْرِفَةَ شِيث وَخُلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَاسْتِسْلَامَ إِسْمَاعِيلَ وَفَصَاحَةَ صَالِحَ وَحِكْمَةَ لُوطَ وَشِدَّةَ مُوسَى وَجِهَادَ يُوشَعَ وَحُبَّ دانيال وحسن يوسف ولحن داود وزهد عيسى عليهم الصلاة والسلام واغمسوه في أخلاق النبيين. The caller called out and it said that give him the character of Adam, give him the recognition of Sheeth, give him the power and the strength of Musa, give him the zuhud of Isa, give him the voice of Dawood, give him the kingdom of Sulaiman, give him the beauty of Yusuf, give him the character and the friendship of Ibrahim, give him the submission of Ismail, give him the patience of Ayub, bless him, drown him, shower him in the qualities of all of these prophets. That yes, Yusuf was the most beautiful, but the Prophet ﷺ was more beautiful. Dawood had the best voice, but when the Prophet read, there was no comparison. Musa was the strongest, but when the Prophet showed to display his strength, there was no comparable. Shower him in the qualities of every prophet. Imam Suyuti then says that every prophet was given one special quality. He says, just imagine the greatness of our prophet if he was given that quality equal to each and every one of them. Internal beauty. Internal beauty. So Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, when speaking about internal beauty and his qualities, he mentions the hadith of the same Sahaba that we were speaking about before, Hassan radiallahu anhu, where he was asking his uncle. He asked his uncle that, tell me, what were the gatherings of the Prophet like? Like, how was he around people? And this is where you're able to understand how how his character was, right? And we're not talking about all of his character. I'll take forever. We're just going to speak about one specific quality and call it a day. He says, tell me how he was. Just want to know a little bit about him. And just like how he started with the first part, fakhman mufakhaman, that he was very beautiful because the people around him became more beautiful in his presence. So when you speak about internal qualities, what was the first thing that he mentioned? He says, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يخزن لسانه. He says that the Prophet ﷺ was very careful on how he used his tongue. Khaza'in literally means treasure. He treasured the words that he said. The words that came from his tongue, they were never extra, nor were they ever too short. They were perfect. يخزن لسانه. And he would not speak about that ما لا يعنيه, that did not relate to him. So he mentions that all of the beauty of his character could be summarized in how he used his tongue. And similarly for us, we can be generous, but have a bad tongue. We can be humble per se and have a dirty tongue. But in reality, what this hadith teaches us, in order for us to have any of those qualities, the tongue comes first. The tongue comes first. Right? He wouldn't indulge in those things that did not have to do with him. And I always, whenever I speak about Shamaail, I literally almost spend an hour talking about just the tongue. We don't have time today, but I'll just mention one narration that sticks out to me when speaking about the harm and power of the tongue. You know, where when you have a great quality, it comes with great strength, but it also has great cons, right? It has great cons if you don't use it properly. And the tongue is one of the greatest limbs in the body. The Prophet says one day that إن أبغض الناس إلي وأبعدهم مني يوم القيامة, that the person that I detest the most and the individual that will be the furthest from me on the day of judgment. It's for me, I always say this is one of the scariest hadith, right? The person that I dislike the most and the person that will be the what? The furthest from me on the day of judgment, right? Is who? A person that doesn't pray as much, or a person that lacks in their tahajjud, a person that lacks in their optional fasts? No. He says the person that will be the furthest from me on the day that we all hope to be around him. He says al-thartharun al-mutashaddidun wal-mutafayhiqun. He says the person that will be the furthest from me is an individual who just talks too much. Just talk too much. Tharthar. Tharthar literally is translated as just talking about every topic that comes to mind, right? Whenever an opinion comes to their mind, they just let it go. They don't think about it. They don't hold it. They don't, they say sleep with it, then come back tomorrow. That's foreign to them. That concept is foreign to them. Thartharun doesn't mean to talk a lot. It means to talk about every subject a lot, right? You can be an expert about cars, but you're not an expert when it comes to politics. You can be an expert when it comes to religion, but you're not an expert when it comes to, any other issue that's happening in the world. When people come to me and ask me, what's your take on this or what's your take on that? And I haven't studied it. I literally would say, my take is whatever Sheikh Umar's take is on this. Or my take is whatever Sheikh Hamza's take is on this. Because we don't know about everything. You go on Facebook and the same person that comments on the politics is the same person that's commenting on a fatwa, is the same person commenting on a basketball game, is the same person commenting on stocks. Like, man, you know a lot, right? How are you able to talk about everything? Thartharun. Every topic that's there, they have skin in the game for it. Like, they have to say something about it. Thartharun, man, it's okay if you don't have an opinion. Right? Imam Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah says, as-sumtu fahuwa al-hikm. That we naturally relate speech to wisdom. But he says that in reality, silence is wisdom. Silence is wisdom. I tell my full-time students that when they go to a community for leading salat or doing khutbah or leading taraweeh, I say just wear your turban, stay quiet, and just nod your head. They think you're a big sheikh. Just that's good enough. Because the moment you start talking too much, this guy, what I'm saying, like, just staying quiet. Umar radiyallahu anhu, he has a beautiful statement. He says, Man kathura kalamuhu kathura saqatu. وَمَنْ كَثُرَ سَقَطُهُ قَلَّ حَيَاؤُهُ وَمَنْ قَلَّ حَيَاؤُهُ قَلَّ وَرْعُهُ وَمَنْ قَلَّ وَرْعُهُ مَاتَ قَلْبُهُ. He says, whosoever finds that they have excessive speech, they just talk about everything, and they can't hold back, they can't just hold it, know that they will have this effect in their life. كَثُرَ سَقَطُ. Their mistakes will be exposed. Because what ends up happening is the person himself or herself exposes the mistake. You know, oh yeah, that thing, that movie was so, oh that. I watched, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have told you. Like the person exposes himself. كَثُرَ سَقَطُ. What happens when our mistakes come out in the open and we expose ourselves? قَلَّ حَيَاؤُهُ. The natural innate quality that Allah has blessed every single one of us with, which is modesty, starts to diminish and starts becoming less to a point that it's non-existent. And when haya leaves our body, or when haya leaves our heart, the Prophet says, إِذَا فَقَدْتُمُ الْحَيَاءَ فَاصْنَعُوا مَا شِئْتُمْ. When you lose the quality of haya, do as you wish, nothing will stop you. Because the first thing that stops us is the quality of haya. Haya from our parents, haya from our siblings, haya from our friends, haya from Allah. I had someone come to me once and they said that, you know, Shaykh, you know, we're always told to do good deeds only for the sake of Allah. Who cares if people are watching us or not? Like, why can't that be true for the opposite? That if we're not going to sin, we only avoid sins because of the sake of Allah. Who cares if people are watching me? Isn't that being insincere? Isn't that being insincere that you avoid doing a sin because someone is watching you? That was his question. How would you answer that? Anyone? No answers? Guesses? No one's a tartar over here? You know, it's okay. You can answer. No. So this is not my answer. This is the answer of Ibn Qayyim and many scholars before us, where he says that doing an act of goodness for somebody else is riya. It's showing off, it's insincere. But avoiding a sin because people are watching you is the biggest branch of iman. Al-haya'u shu'batu min al-iman. Haya is the biggest branch of iman. So avoiding the sin because someone is watching us is a great quality of iman. So Umar says that it all comes down to the tongue. The more we speak, the less haya we have. And the less haya we have, he says, قَلَّ وَرْعُ, that the piety, the righteousness that we have inside of us, due to the acts of goodness that we have committed and all of the virtues that we have done, the virtuous acts, he says what happens is that piety also becomes less. Right? And when that piety becomes less, he says, مَاتَ قَلْبُ, that you have in your life, which is your heart, that dies. So now you're unable to tell the difference between good speech and bad speech. What was wrong about that? There's nothing wrong about that. Like, so what if I said that? And I always say this when it comes to the tongue. You and I are not only responsible for what we say, we are also responsible for how it's received. And I'll say that again. We are not only responsible for the words that we say, we are also responsible for how it's received. What that means is, I can say something and I didn't mean harm, but if the person was harmed, that is sinful. All of the ibadat that we have, salat, saum, zakat, all of the ibadat, the greatest condition is your sincerity and your intention. We always learn this in fiqh, your intention, your intention, your intention. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. It's all about your intention. When it comes to mu'amalat, when it comes to the dealings with people, intention takes a back step. And what comes first is how that person receives it. So I could say something and I didn't intend harm, but if the person was harmed by it, it's on me. We can't say, oh, that's not what I meant. It's not what I referred to. It's not what I was hoping to do. I didn't mean to harm you. That doesn't matter anymore. If harm was done, it still counts. Intention is not the primary condition when it comes to mu'amalat. There's so many things when it comes to mu'amalat that even if you didn't intend to do it, it still counts. Like nikah and talaq, it still counts. Because now it's dealing with people. You're dealing with one another. And the Prophet ﷺ was very careful about that when he used to speak to people and how he used to deal with people. So nonetheless, referring to the tongue, he says that this was the greatest quality of the Prophet, that he was always able to have a grasp of his tongue. Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah says, إن لسان الحكيم من وراء قلبه إذا أراد أن يتكلم بشيء رجع لسانه إلى قلبه وإن لسان القبيح أو الجاهل أمام شفتيه. He says that the tongue of a wise person is always placed behind the heart. So whenever they intend to say something, the tongue chooses to ask the heart, is this something good for me to say? And if the heart says, yeah, it's good, then the tongue goes ahead and says it. But the tongue of an ignorant person is always in between their lips. So there's no process of elimination. Is this good, not good, beneficial, not beneficial? Just says it. And that's what Tharthar is. And then he continues this narration. I'll share that quote with you, that's not a problem. When he continues his narration, and Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, when he starts with the tongue, then he moves to the second quality that I normally like to talk about, but I don't have much time. He continues to the second quality, that the second greatest quality of the Prophet was what? And we could define it, if we could define it in one word, I would choose to define it in the quality of empathy. It was very empathetic. There's a difference between sympathy and empathy. What is it? Anyone? Go ahead. Go ahead, Simi.
Sympathy is when you feel bad for somebody, but empathy is when you put yourself in their shoes.
SubhanAllah. Sympathy is when you feel bad for someone. Oh man, let me share that post on Facebook. That's sympathy. Sympathy. Let me forward in all my WhatsApp groups, right? And that's where it stops. That's sympathy. If it starts there, it's okay, but that's not where it's supposed to stop. Empathy is when I put myself in that person's shoes, man. And that's very powerful, because we sometimes are hardly tolerant enough to keep ourselves in our own shoes. Like I'm going through so much, I can't handle any more stress. You just studied the entire seerah. There was not a person who dealt with more struggle and pain than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How he was able to still quantify this quality of empathy is astonishing. When I hear, and this is a challenge that I'm still dealing with at a personal level, when I hear of a death of someone, a loved one of somebody else, the first thing I ask, and anyone that knows me knows that I do this now, the first thing that I ask is, how old was he or she? Like, oh, he was very young. He was 58 years old. In the back of my mind, I'm like, come on. And that's a negative quality that I'm fighting. How to be empathetic now is difficult. Like, I'm already dealing with that. I can't do it. But the Prophet loses his own children and is still able to not just manifest this quality at a mediocre level, but rather become the innovator of what this quality truly means. Like, he innovated the true definition of being empathetic. When Ikramah ibn Abi Jahl, who was a son of Abu Jahl, you'll learn about him tomorrow, when the Prophet came from Fatih Mecca, a few of these people ran away. Amongst them was Ikramah. He runs away on a ship and he's going to Habasha, and there was a storm, and that storm was rough. And Ikramah said, oh Allah, if you save me from the storm, I'll go back and become Muslim. And Allah saved him. He comes back to Mecca and he is coming to meet the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet hears about Ikramah coming, and this guy, subhanallah, he's a son of Abu Jahl, the man that physically harmed the Prophet. The man that, he was the reason why there was intestines thrown upon him. He was the Fir'aun of our ummah. His son is coming. You know, when you see someone that harmed your parents in front of you, like, oh, but that's where Iman comes from, right? It's not just ibadat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعدت للمتقين الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. That this Jannah has been prepared and decorated for those that are people of taqwa. Who are the people of taqwa? The ones that spend when it's easy or when it's difficult. The ones that spend when it's easy or difficult. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. Those individuals that know how to swallow their anger. What does it mean to swallow your anger? And those of you that are students at Miftaah, they know I always use one story to explain this. Swallow your anger was always very foreign to me to understand. And I've read many tafsirs, I'm like, what does swallowing your anger really mean? And then I realized it's like swallowing food you don't like, right? Once I don't eat fish, just disclaimer, if you ever call me for a da'wah, or any of us brothers, we don't eat, seafood. It's not haram, right? Just we don't eat it. But I was in Dallas for a lecture in the Plano Masjid, and we were called for a da'wah, and we go there, and the brother has prepared like 5 different dishes for us, but they all have a specialty of fish within it. So it's like fish biryani, fish korma, fish kebabs. I'm not sure there's any fish kebabs, but don't worry. Rohan, why are you getting sad? Why are you getting embarrassed? I didn't say he's from Bangladesh, okay? So it's not, that's on you, man. Right? So he and it's beautiful. He's decorated everything. And I get there, and on top of that, he fills up my plate. Like, don't stop here. I got you, man. He fills up a big plate of all 5 types of fish. And now you have to be able to honor the host. You have to eat. So I go, I'm like, oh man. I start eating, and that's when you realize what it truly means to swallow your food. When you chew on it, the person in front of you can tell that you don't like it. Right? Yes or no? Oh. But if you just swallow, what happens? You don't taste it. Right? So the guy in front is like, ooh, man, Mufti's hungry today. Swallowing that food. And I'm, alhamdulillah, khair, we walk out. And that's a reality of a guest. You get in, food's in front of you, you eat and you leave. If you don't like it, go eat something else afterwards. You don't have to make the host know that next time I come, make this for me. It's the host's job to make sure he or she keeps in mind what the guest would like to eat. I'm just going to put that as a disclaimer too. Like, it's both sides, right? The host, when the guest comes to their house, the guest is the most honorable person in the world. When Fatima would come to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet would stand up, get off his spot, and make Fatima sit on his spot. And when the Prophet would go to Fatima's house, she would do the same thing, which tells you what? The most honorable person is the guest. The most honorable person is the guest. So swallowing your anger means that regardless of what you're dealing with, the person in front of you can't trace the anger inside of you. Just swallow. Are you okay? Yeah, alhamdulillah. The moment you leave that gathering, you blow up, right? That's what So when he comes, the Prophet ﷺ tells the Sahabas that I'm hearing that Ikramah is coming to meet me. And I hope that he becomes Muslim. Number one, I hope that he becomes Muslim. That in itself is virtuous enough. The Prophet could have stopped that conversation there, and it could have been a wow moment. Some games have highlights, like there's highlights, like wow moments, catchy moments. But the Prophet's entire life was a highlight reel. There's not a moment which is a highlight. Every moment is a highlight reel. It could have stopped there. But then he says, hey man, do me a favor. When he comes, and this is what you call empathy. When he comes, right, to meet me and to hopefully accept Islam, do not refer to his father as Abu Jahl. Do not refer to his father as Abu Jahl, which means the father of ignorance, right? Because he might feel bad. Like how in touch was the Prophet ﷺ, not with his own emotions, with other people's emotions, right? Being in touch with our own emotions is great. But I said this last time, if that only helps me, then it's not as beneficial. How in touch was he with other people's emotions? That, hey, he's coming, don't call him the son of Abu Jahl. And say what his mother called him, which was Amr ibn Hisham. Call him by his real name, not by the name that we gave him. Right? So when he comes, he doesn't feel bad. We don't know if he's going to become Muslim. We just don't want him to feel bad, right? And that's a sense of empathy, a sense of putting yourself in the shoes of other people. The Prophet one day was going out to the marketplace to buy some fruits. And the narration mentions he had about 10 dirhams. And as he's walking, one person comes to him and says, Ya Rasulullah, can I get some money? And the hadith mentions that he never rejected anyone that asked him for anything. If he didn't have anything, he would actually ask other people. There was a narration that he was sitting in the masjid. Someone came, he asked, the Prophet gave. Someone else came, he asked, the Prophet gave. The third time someone came, he had nothing left. So he actually asked for a loan from one of his companions. And Umar radiallahu anhu, who was sitting in that gathering, actually became upset. You were asked and you gave. You were asked and you gave. You were asked. You don't have any more. Stop giving. I was like, I got it. Just this is between me and them. So someone asks him, he gives him 2 dirhams, and he continues his journey to the market. Another person comes, another 2 dirhams. So he's given away 4. And now as he's getting closer to the marketplace, he sees an elderly lady sitting on the side of the road. And he again, elderly lady, right? An elderly slave lady. And for for youngsters, in our discussion, that's like an elderly uncle in the masjid that we don't even look at. Like he's on a crane, we walk right past him. He'll figure himself out, right? Yeah, he's lived a long life. He's had a good life. You know, when in America, when youngsters see elders, they say, oh, well, they lived their life already. It's okay. They can take care of themselves, right? That's the opposite of empathy. So he sees this elderly lady on her own and she's crying. So he goes to her. He sits down with her. He doesn't know who she is. You don't have to know the person to help them. Because if we only help those that we know, there will always be people who are not helped. There will always be people that are not helped. How many people have we built a relationship with without an incentive? How many salams do we give without an incentive? How many times do we smile at someone without it being reciprocal? There's a give and take. Just giving it for the sake of giving it. He stops. Hey, what's going on, elderly lady? Khala. She says that my master gave me money to go buy some fruits from the marketplace. I had a rip in my pocket and I lost the money. And now I'm going to go back and he's going to get mad at me. So how much was it? She said it was about 4 to 6 dirhams. The Prophet reaches into his pocket, takes it out, gives it to her, and he says, I'll tell your master not to say anything to you. Go ahead, buy your stuff. And he goes home without having anything. And this is where the point can be made that true change in Islam comes when individuals are able to not sacrifice their desires, because that's the first condition. That's the condition for having iman. True change doesn't just come when we sacrifice our desires. Rather, true change comes when people sacrifice their needs and rights. It is my right, but I sacrifice it. It is my right to be able to say this. But you know what? I'll sacrifice it in order to protect that person's heart. It's not when we simply hold back in our desires where Islam manifests in its true beauty, but rather when we sacrifice our own rights and needs. Not dhulm, not oppression, but when we have the right to say something, but we don't because it's okay, I'll talk to them next time, right? I'll talk to them next time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us ability to bring these things into our life. This hadith is very lengthy and I wish we had more time to cover it, but it's 5:15. So in summary, this quality started off with what? In summary, what did it start with? What did it start with? After that. The tongue? Starts with the tongue. And then what? The tongue behind the heart. Okay, and then it comes back. The second quality we spoke about was the quality of empathy. And these 2 qualities, I think, is enough to summarize the Prophet's internal beauty. Number 1, he controlled his tongue. And number 2, he didn't just control his tongue and just sat back and just relaxed, but rather he physically still was able to help people, not in the best way he could, but rather beyond that. When he gave up his needs, not just his desires. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us ability to act upon this. Jazakallah khair wa akhud da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.